Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast presented by Zwift for a special edition. We're both on opposite ends of the world. I'm on the GC as usual, but I'm here with Aike Visbeek. He's at home in Sweden, and you can see the jerseys behind him off the back of maybe the best season in Intermarché Circus Wanty's history, and one that will be hard to top. He's the performance manager there, and we'll get into a little bit of what that actually entails, what that means, as well as having been a director, sports director, at Team Sunweb back when they also won the Giro d'Italia in 2017, some of the best years in that team's history. And he's an interesting man to get on the podcast because he's gone from those highs of a Grand Tour success to now taking a team that bought the CCC license, and then they brought some sort of cyclocross-focused team across to now avoiding the relegation battle, which they did successfully, and moving into a new era in the next sort of triennium, hopefully for them. We'll ask him what his objectives are this season as well for Intermarché Circus Wanty. They've shortened the name a little bit, few less syllables now. But as always, this show is brought to you by Zwift, the Zwift Hub in particular, available in North America, the UK, and Europe. The best value for money trainer on the market. That's the facts if you look it up on any independent reviews for the price, $499 to get you going, get the cassette you need, got the setup guide, and there's plenty of Zwift New Year's events to help you with any New Year's resolutions you have, some fitness goals. Zwift has you covered in January, so it's one of the best times to jump in on Zwift. So go check out Zwift Hub through the link down below and maybe hop on Zwift. Aike, could you let us know your background in the sport? I know you were a rider, but your background in the sport, how you got into being a sports director in team management.
Yes, I started cycling at a very young age. I come from the area of Zaanstad, where also Nicky Terpstra, Kees Bol, Ramon Sinkeldam come from. And I raced until I was 23 actually. I got a knee injury at 21, and I quit when I was 23. I was still studying at the time, and the local club where all these talents come from, DTS Zaandam, they needed an elite team, and they needed also a sport director to start it up. And they asked me, and I thought it was something I had my eyes on. I was always interested in that part of the sport already when I was a young cyclist. So actually I took the opportunity, and on an age when I was still could have raced myself, I was entering the sport directors meeting. And from then on I did that 5 years. After 1 year I asked Marijn Zeeman, the current manager of Jumbo-Visma, to join me, and we did it together for a year together. And then I moved to Sweden, and then I started working for a Swedish team, Team Cycle City, and from there I moved to Team Argo Shimano, which became later Sunweb and is now the current Team DSM. I was there 7 years, and then I had 1 year in 2020 with the SSU Racing Academy, and then came the offer from. Was a very successful year actually with SSU Racing Academy, and then was talking to several teams. But then I decided to join Intermarché, and then the World Tour relegation battle started.
Yeah, and the relegation battle almost dominated a lot of teams' focus for the last sort of year and a half, at least. Some teams only 6 months because they sort of forgot about it, but you guys were on top of it earlier. Do you think stopping cycling for yourself earlier and becoming a sports director or moving into that role younger helped you compared to the guys that have a long, successful career and then retire at 38, 40 years old and then become a director?
Yeah, I think the advantage for me was that I think that it is easier to relate to the young guys getting into the sport, because they are often still, they are not yet 10 years into the professional life, so you understand better what's going on in their lives, adjusting from being a full a semi-professional athlete into a person that has his whole life pretty much devoted to the sport. So I think that helped me. and I think you are also on a younger age and not living in the pro scene for so long. You're also, I think, a bit more open minded and willing to take things in, new impressions, new developments. So yeah, as much as it's also worked against me because it's harder to find the opportunities because the big names from the pro scene, they often get the chances handed to them a lot easier after their career. But I think that also makes that you are you maybe put in more effort and you have to drive to be successful.
It's kind of like Michael Jordan, one of the best basketball players ever. He's now in management, and it's been the opposite end of that spectrum. So I guess it's more how you look at the peloton. A lot of successful directors around the sport are not Tour de France GC winners or even Tour de France stage winners, or some of them even didn't even do the Tour de France. It's more you then sort of need to use your brain in the job. It doesn't matter how actually fast you went as a bike rider. So I think it does help. Like, I've never been in the peloton, so I don't know what that feels like, what that stress is like. I think it does help to some degree to know that psychological aspect a little bit more. But I think it is sometimes the guys who had to work harder to get there, when they do get to World Tour in management or directors or whatever, they seem to be the most equipped to succeed once they do get the opportunity at a Bora, a Jumbo Visma, or DSM, or wherever. When you're at Sunweb, now DSM obviously, did the team objectives change throughout the years? Because they changed the team a lot during that period. There was the Degenkolb era, then the Dumoulin era. How did the team actually change when you were there, and also your role changing within the team?
I think the first 2, 3, 4 years, I was working a lot with the sprint trains and also with the younger riders. And I think that went hand in hand because actually in the Kittel Degenkolb years, these guys were still like 23, 24, 25 years old. So that was a team in development, and that was also our main focus. That those were the riders we could afford. We couldn't afford any GC riders. And of course, in that shadow, Tom Dumoulin developed, and it actually really helped him that there was a sprint team focus because he had more freedom, but he could also learn, the typical bunch riding, positioning, the things that a lot of GC riders actually don't get to learn that much because they always are in the GC business. But and that team developed. I mean, then. I think first Marcel Kittel left the team, and in 2015 Dumoulin was emerging a lot faster than we anticipated because suddenly he was there in the Vuelta, almost winning the Vuelta. And that also meant that we transitioned more to a GC team. We always had sprinters, but the same focus that we had and the same dedication to work with sprint trains that went slowly out the door. And I mean, you can also see it the last couple of years they've been really struggling getting the sprint trains to work in a good way. And that is it really shifted for the team.
Do you think
sorry, go on. Yeah, no. My role changed in that sense that when Tom Dumoulin emerged, I was getting the responsibility for the Grand Tours. So I was less focused on the classics. I did the Ardennes classics mostly, but then I focused a lot on doing the races with Tom.
Just touching on sprint trains, I noticed the Tour de France this year, there was not really a dominant lead-out train. Quickstep weren't as good as they were in 2021. FDJ are one of the teams that they do try a conventional lead-out train in the Giro, 4 guys setting up for Demar, but there's been the rise of the one-man lead-out, for example, like Laporte or Turnison on the Champs-Élysées for Van Aert or Van Poppel for Bora. These teams don't try to dominate the last 3 kilometers. Do you think that's a shift that will continue, or is it just because some teams are weaker at it at the moment and a Cipollini or Cavendish HCC Columbia style lead-out train can still work, or we won't see it again?
I think it's harder because what you see now is that it's not. I mean, there are 15 sprint trains, and the timing, the positioning makes that a lot of the sprint trains burn their guys really early because it's already a long fight, especially through the France. So are those days gone? No, but I think dominantly we will see 8 out of 10 sprints being more like what we see in the Tour de France, where it's not really organized lead out anymore, and it's really up to that last one or two guys that time it exactly right. Um, and I think that has got to do with the fact that so many teams embrace the sprint trains and really worked on it. And then you get this, then it's a real battle. I remember from the times when we were doing it with Marcel Kittel and John Degenkolb, it was often us against Quickstep, and then the other sprint trains, and then sometimes we had Lotto, but the other sprint trains were mainly focused on us. But now everybody's doing their own thing. They're not so focused on the other teams anymore, and that you see.
Yeah, so many teams have a lead out. Like Aike has McClay, who's a good lead out man. He even sprints the Vuelta for himself, got some top fives. There's almost 8 teams, as you say, that have a dedicated professional lead out man or last man like a Sinkeldam, Guarnieri or McClay. It would be interesting to see how someone like Case Bowl, if Cavendish ever does get announced at Astana, if Case Bowl goes there too, how he'll go as a full-time last man, because that's a team that have to quickly develop that sort of expertise in a lead out overnight for their like marquee signing. But you had success at Sunweb. You then, as you said, went to Seg. When you got a call from Intermarché, what was your initial reaction and what drew you to the job? Because you had to know it wasn't going to be contesting or competing for Grand Tour GC podium that year. So what drew you to it?
Well, I mean, I think the main factor was that there was, performance-wise, pretty much nothing really organized. They had one trainer, Frederik Veugel, a really good one, and he had to do it all by himself. So I realized that there was a golden opportunity to build something from scratch. So that was one important thing. But compared to, I had other offers, there were different teams. It was a bit the outsider team, because I was talking with also the management of SAG, because I had also one more year contract. So they also had to, give their go, because if they would have said no, I would have stayed there. But when we had the discussion with them, and I said, well, I think there is more possible with this team, but there was a big risk that the team would relegate, but because in the winter of 2020, and we got the World Tour license, I think there wasn't a single person in the world that would said that Intermarché wouldn't relegate, because on paper we had one of the weakest teams, and we had also the smallest budget. And there was also not a new golden generation stepping up. I think from the young riders, we only had Georg Zimmermann. So it was not a dream a dream setting, but it was also an opportunity. That's the way I saw it, that we could build something up. And when I talked to the management, I also got the confidence. They really also wanted to go into a direction where it was more performance driven. So yeah, in the end, I also and I also thought it was an honor, because the Belgian teams have always, I think that for me is the Champions League of cycling. If you can get the chance to work for a Belgian team, so for me that was also something appealing. But it was really about the fact that we could build something from scratch. And what I mean with that is the performance team, because of course there were already sport directors and there was a team. But there was a lot of responsibility and also freedom to put my own stamp on it.
And by that, do you mean the whole suite of performance culture? Because I remember in summer this year, I was driving up to Ingelasters in Andorra, up to the lake there. I see Taco on the flat bit just before the lake, and then I see 2, 3, 4 more Intermarché riders in the vans ahead of them, waiting for them. Were things like altitude cams, which I think they were on, before big targets common? And or what sort of things do you mean when you're saying introducing a more performance-driven culture?
Now, I mean, before I signed with them, I talked with Frederik Veugel, and the trainer, and I asked him a couple of questions. And then my first question was, how do you make the lineups? And then he told me that one of the senior sport directors did it. And then I said, but are you involved in the process? And he wasn't. And how do you organize it? Yeah, it was pretty much month by month. And then I started to realize, okay, this is an area where we can improve on. we work more with a plan. We get more trainers, and we can build a performance machinery. Then we really can help these riders. And I think that was when I started realizing that we could make a lot of progressions in all these areas. So they did training camps, but they did one training camp before the season, and there was no real organized altitude camps. I think they did it one or twice with Martin, but it was not something that was, it was more an something they organized when there was an opportunity, but it was not in the system. So and I was also surprised that Frederick was not involved in making the selections, because I think the trainers also should be part of that next to the sport directors. So there was a lot of opportunities to improve, and that was also one of the big shifts I made directly, that I worked with year plans instead of going month by month, and that was a bit of a fight in the first weeks, but it also made it better on our organizational area to work more in the season, and also the riders were happy with that, because before that they were always trying to qualify to do the next race. Yeah, so they did their work for 80%, and then they used the other 20% to just hang on and stay as long in the race as possible, because then maybe they could do the next classic, which of course creates a system where riders are not being 100% dedicated to their job in the race or their role in the race. And that was also a big driver. When I talked to the riders one by one, I could feel that was a big factor, a stressful factor in the team. So when we could take that away and maybe narrowed it down to 3-4 races where there was a selection where we could pick riders, but the rest was secured. It eased everybody, and everybody could really focus and grow much more in their role.
And that's, to be honest, one of the most common complaints that I hear from the riders. They really don't like a 2 weeks notice that they have to do X race, and they didn't even know they were doing it. And that makes sense. Like, how can you plan your performance for a race on such short notice? And of course, you can't tell the riders for sure in December, okay, you're doing the Vuelta next year. Things change. It's a long time till next August, but it shouldn't be too hard to at least have a 6-month plan, and you can adjust it as well afterwards. But you come into Intermarché, things improve a little bit. You get the win in the Giro with Taco, and then this year the team just goes crazy, like 24 wins, 2 Giro stage wins, a Vuelta stage win with Menkes, 2 Tour de France, top 10 with Menkes, I think, and the crowning jewel was Biniam at Gent-Wevelgem. And at the same time as that, you're fighting a relegation battle. So what I want to know is, when did the relegation battle stop being a focus? Was it much earlier than I think? Was it before Gent-Wevelgem? Was Gent-Wevelgem and Scheldeprijs the tipping point when you realized you were going to be okay because it was like 800 points or something? Or was it during that golden period sometime in April and May?
It was May. In
Okay.
May we knew it, because then the gap was about 3,000 points, and yeah, I mean, you didn't you know a little bit what you can get per month, and then you look at the other teams that are in trouble. Pretty obvious that in May I said to the riders, this is not a point anymore. Congratulations, we're going to be in the World Tour, and to be honest, that is also, I think, one of the things that we did really good was that every winter, also in 20 and also in 21 leading up to the 22 season, I made a presentation and I made a meeting about the points, because I wanted the riders to understand, how does it work, what is our situation, and what are our focus points. And I think when the riders understood that I had a strategy for it, that there was a clear plan, and that if they would follow also that plan and those focus points, that we could avoid it, and that we had a really good chance. And so I think that really made that we talked about it once in the winter. Then I talked about it one extra time in May, when I could tell everybody, it's finished. And then I talked about it one more extra time in September, when we're almost, when we're fighting for the 4th place in the UCI standing. And I said, okay, now, it would be nice to finish in the top 5 teams wise. So, but that was more in a very relaxed setting. But it took away the stress, and I think that is it was a difficult subject, and I just didn't want it to come into the season as a stress thing. Because in the end, you can talk about results and points what you want, but you need to really talk about how do you get to the level that you are making the results, and I think that is what we succeeded in very good.
That's exactly right. Like, you need the riders. It's easy to say, oh, we need more points. One day races have more points. That's true. And yeah, like, the system did give a lot of points to one day races, but Biniam won Gaan Wevelgem. Christoph won Scheldeprijs. Like, they're not just going there to farm points at some 1.1 races. And on Biniam, how did that signing come about when he was from Delco, who have since folded? I know that recently Lefebvre said that Quickstep looked at Biniam a little bit back in the day. How did the Biniam signing come about? Was it because Delco was in trouble, or did it start before then?
No, before, because Jean-Francois, the CEO from the team, he asked me two things. One, we need to be with the best 18 teams. That's our number one priority, because that, we bought this license, we made investments, and everything is hanging on that we stay in this World Tour. So that was the number one thing. That was the number one priority. But then he also said, I don't think that we have any young riders coming up. There is no Intermarché, Wanty Gobert generation. And when you have the smallest budget and you always have to buy riders, that is not a good situation. That's a very bad situation, because if you have to constantly hire good riders, you really spend a lot more money. So, and I said to him, after working with the team for 4 or 5 weeks, and after the first training camp, I went to Jean-Francois and I said, I think you have a problem, because there is no new generation. We have an old team. More than one third of the team is older than 34 years old. And we had some riders, we had a group of riders like Loic Vliegen and Mede Gent, Lorenzo Rota, about 26, 27 years old, who did some decent results and still could make a step. But we really lacked a new generation. Georg Zimmermann was the only one. And then I gave him a list. I gave him a list of riders, and I said, these are the riders I think, if we make an effort, are possible, and these are the top, the talents that we can bring in, and we have to start now, because if we don't do that, then we're too late. Because what we could offer is a World Tour team and a World Tour program. So, and on top of that list was Biniam, because he was in Delco. Because we cannot sign the big talents from Jumbo or Quickstep. They are not going to go to us. So you have to look at the category riders that can make their situation better by joining us. Biniam was on the top of that list, and so I think it was in March. I think in March, end of February, where I run into his manager, and we talked with him, and I said, he's with you. What is the situation there? Very interested. And that he said, he's already contract for a couple of more years. So, because I thought maybe he has a clause to move into a World Tour team when he gets an offer.
So did I.
But that wasn't the case.
Really?
So he didn't have that. He didn't have that option. And then a couple of weeks later, we heard, because we race a lot in France and we have good contacts there. So then we heard that Delco was in trouble. So then we took contact again and said, listen, what is the situation? And then it was already very serious. There were serious problems. So we discussed with Biniam, and I think the only two teams that talked with him was us and UA, and there were like 8 teams interested. But I had prepared really well. I had a real good plan, step by step, year by year. And I think we also hit the spots what was important for him. He wanted a familiar team, because he spent most of the year away from his family, which is already very difficult for him. So he also wanted a team where he feel good. And the manager, his manager had riders with us, so he could say to Biniam, hey, listen, this is if you want to have a familiar team, then this is the right team to go, because I have experience with other riders there. But of course, the offer from UAE, I think it was 2 or 3 times higher than what we offered. But like I said, we had a plan, and Biniam is a really down to earth guy, and he wants to win races, and he was, he had these points. He wants to do the finals. He wants to make results. He wants to grow step by step, and yeah, he wanted to be in a team where he could feel at home. So that matched, and yeah, actually from the beginning it was a really good connection. And when he also saw that what we promised we delivered, it became, he started to trust us, and like I said, we have a good cooperation. Yeah.
Wow. So I remember he signed that 4 year with Delco, which at the time made no sense that he would sign that, I thought, without a clause that would at least allow him to be released if a World Tour team came along, because he already had results before 2021, like third in Trofeo de Guelia, which, of course, I mentioned the race a lot, but it isn't the biggest race, but I think it was against Ciccone or maybe Rota, maybe that was 2021. So I'm really surprised to hear that. And it's interesting to hear, like, he chose the team because of the pathway, which, it's clearly worked out. He won a big classic like Wevelgem, Giro stage. I assume he's going to go to the Tour this year, where the first few stages in the Basque Country look pretty good for him too. And that's the next question I have, sort of mentioning the Tour de France. Relegation's out the window. You've got the 3 year license, 23, 24, 25. You can just focus on results. But a lot of outgoing transfers, especially 2,000 point scorer and a race winner like Christoph. Herman's out the door. He podiumed a Monument. Jan Hirt gone. That's over 10 riders coming in. Was that a choice? Do you trust that you have a system now that will take the new riders and get the same results and keep improving? Or is it actually that success breeds money? Those riders now want money because they've got good results. And it's just a commercial reality that once they've got the good results, you're now priced out of a lot of them.
No, I think it's the commercial reality that we perform really good. We have a bunch of riders that almost all the riders perform a lot better. That means that you also, with contract renewals, you have to adjust, and it's really hard. The riders get really good offers, and we cannot keep them all. So then you have to make choices, and certain riders we could keep, and we lost a lot of quality riders. I have to say that I hope that we are not in the same situation next year, that we need to bring in 10 plus new riders, because that is what we really want to avoid. We want to come into the more stable waters. This is the reality from two successful years, and our budget not growing as fast as the team performances.
What are your goals for 2023? Do you target things as specific as winning a Tour de France stage, or are they more process goals like a points target, or is it a combination of top 10s? What is it?
A combination. I mean, we have a couple of really specific goals, and the Tour de France stage is a big one, because it still hurts missing out on the ones this year. Then we want to do also a top 10 in the Grand Tour. It will be hard to replicate 4 top 10s in the Grand Tour like this year, but we still want to be up there once, at least. And I think the big general factor is that we want to be consistently riding for the podiums and the top 5s in the classics, and because it's hard to say now that we automatically our season is not good when we don't win a classic. I mean, we cannot say that. We have to be humble. We have to put the hard work in. But if we are there consistently, and we are up there in the top 5, in the top 3s, I think that is what we need to show to show that we are establishing ourselves on the level that we want. And next to that, in a more general way, I would say we have the goal to be a stable top 10 team in the World Tour points ranking. So yeah, it's like that. It's a combination of things.
Yeah, and then maybe it's like a cycle, right? As you get more success, you maybe win a Tour de France stage this year or next year, then you become more competitive for sponsorship dollars. The budget can then go up a little bit. Then it's sort of that pattern as well. Similar to Quickstep. I assume Quickstep's budget with Soudal coming in is healthier than it was 7-8 years ago. I guess you're on that path, which is a pretty exciting place to be, especially with the relegation battle over, some young talented riders signed. And also I think you're now in a sweet spot where riders like a Lilian Carmajan are thinking, okay, I'm not 35 yet. I can try and get a bit more out of myself before it's too late and go to a performance-driven culture team where I'll get leadership chances too. And because if you go somewhere like FDJ, which does have good performance management, they're getting their riders going pretty fast, going well, but maybe he doesn't get the chances there to go for a stage win in whatever major race. So I think you're in a good spot where you can't just hand over multiple millions of euro, to X rider, this rider, but you are getting some riders really wanting to perform and maybe at a fair market value.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, we offer opportunities, and we give them the right weapons to perform, and that was also my goal from the beginning. Is if I could give them more or less the same weapons as the better teams, then we cannot maybe give them the big salary, but we give opportunities. So that's also what the teams now recognize. What the riders recognize, that they can have opportunities with us. And I'm straightforward with them. I mean, we don't pay the big salaries. I mean, we're not underpaying our riders, but yeah, that. And I think, when you look back at our transfer season, I think one important note is that our budget goes up, but we had to spend quite a lot of money also in our infrastructure because we were still riding the World Tour team program on a pro Conti organization. We had simply way too less people doing a hell of a lot of work. So we also really had to be disciplined and work on the fundament of the team, which is, of course, when you do such a good season and suddenly the managers, instead of coming to us in August, July with the leftover riders, now in May and April stand there with their top riders, is very tempting. But I think we did it in the right way. But then, of course, we maybe don't meet the expectation of the people making the big signings. But we try to be smart, and we try to have, like you say, the riders that are finding the opportunities with us and are willing to maybe look beyond the allure and the stardom of the big teams, and really are down to making the right step for the career.
And it'll be interesting to see. There are other riders like Mike Turnison who sort of fit into that role too, where he's still in his 20s and he can develop and probably still compete for classics, I assume, as a leader for Intermarché this year. But the last question I had was about equipment, because it's impossible for us on the podcast to know which equipment's the best. I know which teams are going fast on the time trial bikes. I know, like when you see Kung started going quicker when Lapierre brought out the new time trial bike and they promoted that. But are there differences between equipment, just like basic stuff, like group set, bike, clothing, helmet in World Tour, where it can actually change winning or losing between the teams? Is it closer to F1 on the road, not just in time trial stages? Is the difference bigger than people think, or is it actually, it is a level playing field amongst all the teams?
No, there are definitely differences, and these also shift during the season. I would almost say that in that sense, it's like Formula One, but there is. I mean, I always approach it in a way that it's an accumulation of percentages that we can win. And it's in many aspects of the bike. I mean, you can maybe have half a kilo heavier bike, but maybe with the right wheel sets or the tires, you can regain that loss. But of course, if you tick, the more boxes you tick, the better the effect. And that's also the limiting factor. You're also limited to the sponsors that you have. And I think that is also now, at least for us, we had to make some more performance-focused choices rather than the best commercial. The sponsor deal with the equipment that gave the best money. So there is the balance, and yes, it is really becoming more important now, and you see it more and more. And it's exactly like you say. I mean, it's hard to rate our TT bike because we don't have any specialists. But when you have the specialists who are pretty much on the same level, then it comes more to the front to see if something really significant happens when they are put on a new TT bike. But no, it is getting much more important. I have to mention that, of course, the peloton is divided with the parts. There is a group with Shimano, there's a group with SRAM, and there's a group with Campiolo. There is not, with that, you don't see a hell of a lot of difference. But most of the other parts, there is quite some choices you can make. And it is also not only about the choices, and then it's also really about how you use them and how you work with them. And the more effort and time you invest in that, the more watts you find.
Yeah, because you might actually have the quickest tires, but then if you run them at the wrong pressure or wrong pressure for certain races, they're no longer the quickest tire, or paired with the wrong wheel set, the whole system is no longer faster. But yeah, like there are the big differences, and it's particularly prevalent in the TT. Look, some riders, maybe Bahrain, for example, on the TT bike, you can see, okay, if you put that guy on a Quickstep or a Jumbo, Ineos, they're set up, he's going to fly. I mean, that's probably true for most riders, to be honest, in the TT if they go to those teams. But it is interesting to hear that on the road it also makes a big difference. So probably also in Paris-Roubaix, where you see teams starting to do funky stuff, like when DSM were thinking about doing those like inflating tires, like on the margins, that it might make a difference too. But thanks very much, Aike, for the interview. I think it was really interesting, and good luck for the rest of the season. Maybe we'll check in with you if you're in a good mood after the Tour de France. If you're in a Tour de France stage, I'll book you in for that now. So best of luck for the season, and thanks for coming on Lanterne Rouge Cycling Podcast.
All right. Thank you for having me.